On Interior Environment and Related Agencies will come to order. I'm pleased to be here marking up the fiscal year 2026 Interior Appropriations Bill with Chairman Cole, Ranking Member DeLauro, Subcommittee Ranking Member Pingree, and the members of the Subcommittee. Those members that aren't here will be here before long. We had a conference over in the Capitol Hill Club, and it's just ending, and so they'll be wandering in here before long. Better be before long, or we'll get outvoted. I'd like to thank, I was going to say, that might shorten your opening statements. Let's go straight to the vote. Yeah. I'd like to thank Chairman Cole for his leadership of the committee and getting us to this point in what is an unusual fiscal year with this, with the new administration coming in and all the things that have been done. It has been a difficult appropriation season, and Chairman Cole and Ranking Member DeLauro have done a good job at getting us to where we are. I want to recognize Ranking Member DeLauro and Ranking Member Pingree. Ranking Member Pingree has consistently been a wonderful partner, and I appreciate her commitment to the subcommittee's issues. I look forward to continuing our work together to move this Interior bill forward. Lastly, I want to thank members of the staff on both sides of the aisle. They are truly the people that do the hard work of putting these appropriation bills together, and they do a fantastic job. Without their dedication, we would never get as far as we do. And so both the ranking and majority members of the staff are truly appreciated. The fiscal year 2026 Interior bill provides $37.97 billion, which is $2.5 billion or 6.2% below the enacted level. I've consistently said that I refuse to balance the budget on the backs of the tribes, so I'm proud that this bill makes strong investments to further the federal government's trust and treaty responsibilities. Doesn't meet it, but it furthers it in the direction that this committee has been working on for the last decade under both Republican and Democratic leadership. The bill provides $8.4 billion for Indian Health Services, $1.5 billion for the Bureau of Indian Education, $2.9 billion for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, including $771.84 million for public safety and justice programs to support law enforcement in Indian country. This includes $31 million for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Initiative, an issue that is very important to me and members of this committee. We've had a hearing on this when we discovered, and most people don't know that we lose 6,000 murdered, missing Indigenous people every year off reservations and stuff. And this is something that is a huge issue that we've got to address. This moves us in that direction. This bill also fully funds must-pay costs for our tribes, including contract support costs and 105L leases. The total funding for Indian country reflects the same level overall that we provided in our 2025 House Interior bill last year. The bill again fully funds the Payment in lieu of Taxes program, which provides payments to nearly every state in the country for certain tax-exempt federal lands. Most of our states received their 25 PILT payments last month, and this bill ensures that this bipartisan program continues to be fully funded. Additionally, the bill provides full funding for the federal wildland firefighter pay fix that was included in the 25 CR to help improve firefighter recruitment and retention and to give financial certainty to the men and women protecting our communities from catastrophic wildfires. To meet our obligations while prioritizing these critical programs, the bill right-sizes funding for most other appropriations. For example, the EPA is cut by nearly $350 million, or 23% below the enacted level. This cut is deeper than the cut in last year's 25 House Interior bill, with reductions targeted at internal operating programs and regulatory activities. The bill continues to fund grants that go directly to states and tribes for water infrastructure projects and to help fulfill their delegated authority under federal laws like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. These programs are important for issuing permits for continued development and economic growth. The bill also contains community project funding for EPA clean and drinking water infrastructure projects. While requests greatly exceed the funding available for the projects, we did our best to provide some funding for all eligible projects given the impact these dollars will have in communities across the country. Lastly, in terms of policy, the bill echoes this administration's efforts to roll back costly regulatory overreach from the prior administration and promote domestic energy production by one, halting heavy-handed job-killing EPA Biden-era regulations, limiting the prior administration's attempts to abuse the Endangered Species Act and ensure continued access to our public lands, and expanding access to hard rock and critical minerals. In closing, I'm pleased that this bill focuses spending where it is needed most and makes great strides to address critical needs across Indian country. The bill doubles down on rolling back burdensome and costly regulations from the prior administration, and it helps unleash American energy and domestic mineral development. I look forward to working with Ranking Member Pingree and other members to move this Interior bill towards enactment. I now recognize the Ranking Member, Ms. Pingree, for her opening statement.
Thank you for yielding, Chairman Simpson. I very much appreciate our working relationship, and I do hope that we will be able to find common ground during this appropriations cycle so we can enact a full year funding bill. This seems especially important now that we are acutely aware of the damage that the full year continuing resolution has allowed the administration to inflict. We've been witnessing how the inability to negotiate a full year bill last year has undermined the power of the committee and the Congress. The administration is funding, or rather not funding, programs at whatever level it wants, all the while refusing to share details with this committee. The chief of the Forest Service testified in the Senate budget hearing that he didn't know whether any of the funds appropriated for state and local fire assistance would actually go to the communities that they serve. Instead, the dramatic flexibility afforded by the continuing resolution has allowed the Forest Service to divert millions of dollars to pay employees who took deferred resignations. Talk about waste. States are losing critical funding while the Trump administration is paying employees not to work. And this isn't the only way that states are suffering. We've seen grants that didn't have the right buzzwords be illegally terminated. In my state of Maine, the EPA canceled 3 PFAS grants. It then reinstated them, only to re-terminate one for not meeting so-called administrative priorities. The upheaval and uncertainty caused by these frozen funds and canceled grants is causing real harm and will have lasting damage. President Trump continues the assault on the states through his budget request. The budget proposes to cut EPA funding to the states, asserting that the grant programs have become a crutch for the states. I don't even know what that means. This amounts to an enormous unfunded mandate, and I am deeply disappointed that this bill does not rebuke their proposal. Instead, the bill cuts funding to the states for water infrastructure by 62%. It also cuts grant programs that fund state environmental programs and slashes funding for the EPA operating programs by 23%. Withdrawing federal funding will mean states and local governments will be forced to raise their taxes or cut their services, and nobody will benefit. Republicans just increased the federal deficit by $3.4 trillion during reconciliation, and at the same time, they're cutting funding for programs that protect public health and the environment, that maintain our national parks, and that support the arts and humanities. The cuts in this bill, taken together with the rescissions in the Big Ugly Bill, will debilitate Americans' ability to address the climate crisis. It has become clear to me that the administration has moved beyond climate change denial into actively dismantling the government's climate work. If we are going to keep the public safe, then building resilience and fighting against the impact of climate change is a common sense measure. Yet Republicans have clawed back those funds so that they could give tax breaks to billionaires. Defunding the EPA's climate change work isn't just a policy position, it is condemning future generations. And our children and grandchildren will suffer because of these cuts. The bill cuts the National Park Service by $213 million. That is on top of the $1 billion Republicans rescinded from national parks and public lands in the Big Ugly Bill. That funding would have supported conservation projects, habitat restoration, and staffing at our parks. Making matters worse, the majority's failure to reauthorize the Great American Outdoors Act means that the National Park Service will no longer receive an annual $1.3 billion to address deferred maintenance. If we add them all together, these cuts have created a crisis that risks destroying the legacy of our national park system. Support for our national parks used to be bipartisan and a point of pride for this country, and I do hope we can recapture that spirit. The administration is also trying to sideline anything it deems artistically or culturally offensive, regardless of the effect its decisions have on people and communities. I think it was appalling to watch the Trump administration illegally terminate thousands of grants at both the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities earlier this year. It fired nearly 80% of the NEH staff and revoked the funding for the state humanities councils. This is money that was supposed to help artists and workers, to teach kids in rural areas, to support local economies that rely on cultural institutions but cannot afford to sustain them alone. In the wake of these assaults, it is critical that Congress asserts its support for the NEA and NEH, so I am vehemently opposed to the cuts in this bill, which would slash each endowment by 35%, or $72 million. With a relatively small budget, the NEA helps power a $1.2 trillion arts economy, creating jobs and sustaining main streets in even the smallest of towns. NEA funds go to book groups for veterans, to after-school theater programs in rural towns, to folk festivals that preserve cultural heritage, and to local arts councils. Cutting the NEA doesn't just silence voices and stymie creators, it erases the spaces where healing, connection, and community happen. The bill also cuts funding for cultural institutions, such as the National Gallery of Art and the Smithsonian Institution. This comes on the heels of the president accusing the Smithsonian of promoting divisive, race-centered ideology and not doing enough to promote American greatness. It is one thing to criticize a particular program or funding stream, but attempting to recast entire agencies in your own political image or silence expressions that you don't like goes against the values that we hold dear: free speech, equal opportunity, and the idea that our democracy is strengthened when everyone has access to knowledge, culture, and a voice in the national story. The president's attempt to dismantle our artistic and cultural institutions will not make America great again, and it must not be tolerated. Despite having control of both chambers in the White House, Republicans could not restrain themselves with the inclusion of policy riders. There are 72 poison pill riders that cripple environmental protection, undermine climate change policies, and add to the national deficit. There is one rider in particular that's particularly egregious to me. The bill includes a provision that would block the EPA from finalizing or implementing its draft risk assessment regarding PFAS in sewage sludge. PFAS contamination is a crisis facing the entire country. Maine has seen its devastation firsthand and has been ahead of the curve in testing and responding to contamination. Farmers in my state have lost their entire livelihood, have lost their farms, and watched their families get sick from forever chemical contamination in their fields from sewage sludge, which was spread on their fields. Blocking the EPA to working to better understand the potential risks to human health and the environment posed by the presence of PFAS in sewage sludge makes absolutely no sense. We know that PFAS remediation is going to be immensely costly, so why wouldn't we take steps to prevent contamination in the first place? In closing, I want to thank the Ranking Member DeLauro for her tireless efforts on this committee. I want to thank Chairman Cole for working together with me and the work he's done, particularly on behalf of the tribes. And I want to thank the staff on both sides of the aisle. The cuts in this bill are irresponsible, and they will hurt agencies that are already struggling to deliver services to the public. Any arguments that these cuts are somehow fiscally responsible ring hollow in the wake of Republicans adding $3.4 trillion to the national deficit. I oppose the bill, I urge my colleagues to oppose the bill, and I yield back.
I now recognize the distinguished chairman of the full committee, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate being with you. I want to thank the ranking member as well, Ms. Pingree, my good friend, ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Laura, and all the members of the subcommittee on both sides of the aisle for being with us this morning. Today, we continue our work on FY 2026 Interior and Environment Appropriations Bill. The measure covers several agencies, including the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Environmental Protection Agency that work to conserve and protect our nation's natural, cultural, and environmental resources. Importantly, it advances the federal commitment to honor our trust and treaty responsibilities to American Indians and Alaska Natives through Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service. I'm proud that the legislation prioritizes funding across tribal accounts, and I want to thank you and Ms. Pingree for that in particular. It's been an ongoing commitment of this subcommittee, and I'm proud that it ensures the delivery of critical services in Indian country. Funding for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Indian Education, and Bureau of Trust Funds Administration, and the Indian Health Service were held at FY25 House levels, allowing for targeted increases in vital tribal programs. Overall, Chairman Simpson has demonstrated the importance of targeting resources where they are needed most. Funding has been reduced for lower priority programs and strategically reallocated to urgent needs, including wildland fire management. Further, we include provisions that reduce regulatory burdens, protect American jobs, and lower energy costs. With a focus on U.S. energy dominance, we also strengthen our national security by promoting American energy production and expanding access to critical minerals. We meet all these vital objectives while cutting billions in spending from the previous fiscal year, demonstrating strong stewardship of both America's natural and financial resources. I'd like to thank Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, the full committee Ranking Member DeLauro, and the majority and minority staff for their hard work. I look forward to consideration of this bill today. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the distinguished ranking member of the committee, Ms. DeLauro, for her remarks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. It's a really important subcommittee, and I'm always grateful for the work that we do in concert, along with you and Chairman Cole and Ranking Member Pingree. And I also want to share my appreciation for the subcommittee staff's work, and in particular Rita Culp, Jocelyn Hunn, and Michael Schmeltz. I oppose the bill before us today, which will raise utility bills and energy prices, worsen the climate crisis, put polluters over public health, and abandon the stewardship of our national parks, and all to benefit billionaires and big corporations. We are in the middle of a cost of living crisis. President Trump promised to lower costs on day one, but instead, he and House Republicans are making the cost of living crisis even worse. The big ugly bill is handing massive tax breaks to billionaires and to the biggest corporations, while driving up energy costs for homes and businesses. Today, we are considering another House Republican bill, which will raise costs for the struggling working class and middle class. It will damage our public lands, promote dirty energy, threaten Americans' health by leaving them vulnerable to polluted air and water. Never mind that we've never received a complete budget from the White House. We are holding this markup in a completely unprecedented time, when Congress's authority is being challenged by a lawless administration. Since taking office, the Trump administration has stolen resources appropriated to this committee and appropriated by this committee, passed by Democrats and Republicans in the House and in the Senate, for programs and services across the federal government, including several in this bill that help to lower the costs for the middle class and working class, protect vulnerable populations, keep our environment clean. The administration has frozen, attacked, and destroyed grants that help tribes with hazard mitigation, grants that support the recovery of endangered species, grants that decrease flooding risks, and grants that help restore areas damaged by floods and wildfires. Nearly $1.5 billion in funding for the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, and Bureau of Indian Affairs was frozen. Scores of public servants were laid off. These cuts are not numbers on the page. They are not only felt in Washington, D.C., they affect all of our communities. Mary, a Connecticut grandmother, was devastated when her granddaughter, a trained EMT, skilled ice climber, and a member of the Alpine Rescue Team, was fired from her job at Mount Rainier National Park. Mary's granddaughter had worked for the Park Service for over 5 years, but because she had been transferred to Mount Rainier less than a year ago, was technically a probationary employee. DOJ and the Elon Musk decided that Mary's granddaughter's public service was less valuable than a tax break for billionaires. Lost and injured climbers in Mount Rainier National Park will pay the price. I ask my colleagues, do your constituents consider national parks waste, fraud, and abuse? Do they come to your town halls and complain there were too many employees at our national parks? I doubt it. The administration has also stole $100 million from the Connecticut Green Bank, which supports public-private partnerships that lower energy costs for residents, as well as resiliency, land conservation, and other areas of environmental infrastructure. The Green Bank is supported by Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund grants, which the courts have repeatedly found was unlawfully terminated by the Environmental Protection Agency. The Green Bank Board of Directors member John Harrity said, and I quote, "It's just astounding that the work that the Green Bank does, which is so vital to the future of the state and the country and the world, should be impeded in this way," end quote. All of these programs, Congress enacted and appropriated funding for in law. They are substituting Congress's decisions and judgments with their own, turning Article 1 of the Constitution on its head. And unfortunately, this bill doubles down on President Trump's pro-pollution, anti-environment, anti-parks, and arts agenda. Because of this bill, families will pay more at the pump and on their utility bills, thanks to deep cuts to funding for infrastructure and the removal of important fuel efficiency regulations. This bill abandons our children and our grandchildren, who will have to confront an ever-worsening climate crisis by eviscerating the EPA, reducing science funding, promoting fossil fuel lease sales on public land, and deconstructing critical emissions regulations. This bill will worsen Americans' health by ending enforcement of the numerous Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act regulations, as well as hazardous waste and pesticide laws, all and by allowing corporations to spew toxic pollution into our communities. And this bill slashes funding for national parks and exploits our public lands for the sake of corporate profits, underfunding the National Park Service, especially after DOJ eviscerated Park Service staffing, means fewer seasonal employees, making it more difficult and cumbersome for our constituents to visit and enjoy our nation's parks, which are vital to the economies of so many states. Americans cannot keep up with the ever-increasing cost of living, but instead of working with Democrats to make investments can help to lower their costs, protect our environment, and preserve our public lands and institutions. Republicans have put forward a bill that favors billionaires and corporations' rights to pollute and destroy the environment over the health and the safety of the American people. I cannot support this bill, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Are there other members who wish to make opening remarks? Ms. McCullum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the courtesy of yielding. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Pingree and the staff on both sides of the aisle for your work on this subcommittee. I know difficult choices were made. I want to address some serious concerns that I find in the funding cuts and the 72 partisan writers in this bill that make me unable to support passage of this bill out of this subcommittee at this time. We won't get into all of them in great detail, but I will touch on a few. But before I do that, I want to recognize the continued nonpartisan support. Chairman Cole, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, Ranking Member DeLauro, and all of us who work together to uphold our tribal and trust treaty responsibilities. Even in these very contentious times, we stood united as our Interior Subcommittee leadership has for decades. And it's something that makes me proud to be an appropriator and a member of this committee. Chairman Simpson, as I said, I appreciate that you once again prioritize funding for life, health, and safety issues for Indian country. And I thank both you and the chair, the ranking member, for supporting and following through on your commitment to include advanced appropriations for the Indian Health Services for the 4th year in a row. This will continue to save lives. But this only happens because there were other cuts that had to be made in other parts of this bill. And unfortunately, even some of those cuts do affect our tribal brothers and sisters and things that are important to them. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency, something that our tribal nations work with greatly to protect the life, health, and safety of their tribal members. A cut of 23% to the EPA's budget and the rollback of climate regulations, I believe, will severely harm the quality of life for Americans in the years to come. The EPA's role helps us to live longer, healthier lives, protects the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil which we receive our nourishment from. It cleans up polluted sites after environmental emergencies, some man-made, some made by nature. But this bill, unfortunately, rubber stamps the Trump administration's plans to gut this agency's scientific research offices and the environmental program work that it does to protect each and every one of us. We are all seeing the increased severe weather events, the extreme cycles of droughts and floods. And as the climate changes and absorbs more moisture, our weather patterns have changed with the way that storms intensify, the way storms just sit and rain for days and days on end now, increasing the rate of flooding and putting life and property at great risk. The writers in this bill will just pump more fossil fuel pollution into the air, increase the rate of climate change, even as the American people are experiencing yet another summer filled with dangerous levels of heat, haze, wildfire smoke, and now I can't even talk about the flooding in Texas. It fails to continue to confront climate change, is what I'm trying to say. And when we do that, we fail to protect our communities, we fail to protect our constituents. As the ranking member on the Defense Committee, I'm intimately aware that the DoD considers climate change to be a top national security issue. Even here at home, our national security is impacted by climate change. Runways that constantly have to be replaced or can't be used because of permafrost thawing in Alaska. Radar stations that are falling into the Pacific Ocean. I could go on and on about the number of dollars that are now being spent for repair after we go through the hurricane cycles. The inadequate funding in this level for the EPA to address climate change will harm our country's ability to respond to this threat today, tomorrow, and the future. And that puts us, our economic security, and our national security at a global disadvantage. These cuts also carry immediate responses besides climate. I could go on about the other cuts in the bill and how they're going to rise cost to utilities, has been pointed out, and lower the quality of life for many other people in our communities by pollution not being addressed. But cuts to drinking water and wastewater infrastructure will shift costs to our local communities and increase rates for many. I could go on about the cuts to the National Park Service, the Forest Service, but I appreciate the ranking member doing such a wonderful job in pointing that out. But I do want to say that the major cuts to the National Endowment of the Arts, the Humanities, the Smithsonian Museums are another blow to our cultural, our civic, and artistic exchange that is vital in living in a democratic society. We will pay greatly for not doing these civic lessons every single day that touch the lives of every American and every person who visits this great democracy. That's how we tell our story. And not to do that in a fair, free, transparent, without intimidation way is just something that I find incredulous. So, Mr. Chair, I will close with this. I can find you more money. We should work to make sure that payment in lieu of taxes goes back to the Ways and Means Committee where it originally was, because it is a tax issue. So I pledge to work with you as we move forward to make this bill better, but I also pledge to work with you in the years to come to raise the alarm of what the Ways and Means Committee, by pushing their payment in lieu of taxes in this committee, is harming our environment, our future, and the legacy we leave our children. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentlelady for her comments. Are there other members wishing to make opening comments? Mr. Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I wish to thank you, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member Pingree, and Ranking Member DeLauro for your great work on this bill. But I respectfully and regretfully oppose this bill as written. Now, Mr. Chairman, while this bill rejects the President's most damaging budgetary proposals, it includes a cut of more than $176 million to the National Park Service's operational budget, which will force an additional 5,000 park staff cuts, stretching an already thin workforce that was devastated by DOGE. Mr. Chairman, I began my professional career as a history teacher in the Charleston, South Carolina public school system. And I spent my entire congressional career working to preserve our nation's history, both its ugly failures and its beautiful triumphs. Among my most popular legislative accomplishments are the establishments of the South Carolina National Heritage Corridor, the Southern Campaign of the Revolutionary War, and the Gullah Geechee National Heritage Corridor that runs from Wilmington, North Carolina, down to St. Augustine, Florida. This is an interesting corridor. I remember when I first attempted to get it passed, it took me 6 years. They told me that South Carolina was too small a state to have more than one heritage corridor. Of course, we now have 3. Because South Carolina played a very critical role in the Revolutionary War. People remember the Civil War having started there, but for the Battle of Charleston and the campaign around Cowpens, I'm not too sure that the Revolutionary War would have ended the way it did. But national parks, like our heritage corridors, are home to many of our nation's most beloved monuments, historic sites, hallowed grounds, and iconic landscapes. While we just celebrate America's birthday on July 4th, Republicans' gift of gutting our treasures, our parks, and national monuments seem to be a broader, deliberate campaign to erase history and degrade educational integrity. While there are 63 national parks, 3 of which are in South Carolina, none of which were there before I was elected to Congress, the National Park Service manages 433 sites across more than 85 million acres. The locations amassed over 330 million visitors last year. And according to the National Park Service, their spending in communities around these sites resulted in over $55 billion in benefits to our nation's economy and supported over 400,000 jobs. Now, I might add that these national parks are mostly in rural communities. And but for these national parks, the economy in these communities would not be what they are today. 2 weeks ago, the Republicans passed their big, ugly bill that took away more than $267 million from the National Park Service and the Bureau of Land Management that Congress previously approved. If that isn't enough, this bill cuts an additional $213 million from the National Park Service. The Republican obsession with DEI initiatives is distorting the history included on the National Park Service website and throughout the Park Service. In March, it was reported that the Trump administration efforts to dismantle DEI caused the National Park Service to take down web pages dedicated to LGBT and other civil rights activities. And in a March 27th executive order titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, the Trump administration removed references to Harriet Tubman from the National Park Service webpage about the Underground Railroad before later restoring it. Now, this is happening throughout the Park Service. And I'll tell you, as someone who has studied history all of my life, and I study it daily, there's not a day that goes by but I don't dedicate some time to looking at our nation's history and how it affects what we do today. It is a shame, and I don't want to be personal here, but my youngest daughter serves on our local school board. And I was shocked over this past weekend, as we were celebrating July 4th, and she talked about her frustrations with these attempts to take the history out of the public schools, these attempts to get rid of civics in the public schools. And she said to me, Daddy, what I know about government, I learned in the 7th and 8th grade and sitting down with your moms. And now we can't teach it to our school children. That, to me, is devastating. And that seems to be what we are continuing to do here. So on May 20th, Secretary Markup ordered that all national parks and other public lands must post notices encouraging people to report any signs or other information that are negative about either past or living Americans, or that fail to emphasize the beauty, grandeur, and abundance of landscapes and other natural features. Charleston, South Carolina is in my district. I taught school in Charleston, South Carolina. I see the monuments to enslavement. I don't tell my students not to learn what it means. I want them to know what it means. And I want them to really work to help this country continue its trek toward a more perfect union. So I implore my Republican friends to stop the madness and reinvest in our national park system in our classrooms and in we are the stewards of this history. We're the stewards of these classrooms. And Pearl Harbor, where my uncle sat on December 7th, 1941, in the USS Arizona, when it was bombed. He never talked about his life in the Navy. It was not pleasant back in the 1940s. But I don't think we run away from that. I think we do the things that are necessary so that our young people will know we should not ever live that again. We ought to teach about the Japanese internment and recognize that as a site for us to continue to learn from and continue our trek toward a more perfect union. The point of preserving history is to learn from it. Learn that which was good, that which was bad, do all that we can to accentuate those positives, eliminate those negatives, and continue our trek toward a more perfect union. So, Mr. Chairman, as I said in my opening, I regret that I cannot support this bill. I love history, the good and the bad, and I think we should all work to preserve it, learn from it, and know how to conduct ourselves going forward. And I yield back.
The gentleman for his comments. Are there other members who wish to make an opening statement? If not, I recognize the gentlelady from Utah, Ms. Malloy, for a purpose of making a motion.
I move the bill be favorably reported to the full committee.
Question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
Mr. Chair, I request a
In the
recorded
opinion of the
vote.
chair, the ayes have it. A roll call is requested. Those in favor of taking a recorded vote will raise your hands. Sufficient number having in support a recorded vote is ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Amadei? Yes. Mr. Amadei, aye. Mr. Cloud? Mr. Cloud, aye. Mr. Clyburn?
No.
Mr. Clyburn, no. Mr. Cole? Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Ms. DeLauro? No. Ms. DeLauro, no. Mr. Elzey? Mr. Elzey, aye. Mr. Harder?
No.
Mr. Harder, no. Ms. Malloy? Ms. Malloy, aye. Ms. McCollum? No. Ms. McCollum, no. Ms. Pingree?
No.
Ms. Pingree, no. Mr. Reschenthaler? Aye. Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mr. Simpson?
Aye.
Mr. Simpson, aye. Mr. Zinke? Aye. Mr. Zinke, aye.
Any member wish to change their vote? You sure? On this vote, the ayes are 8, the noes are 5. The bill is favorably reported to the full committee. Ask unanimous consent that the staff be permitted to make technical and conforming changes to the bill and report. Without objection, so ordered. Copies of the bill and report with the technical and conforming changes will be delivered to all full committee members' offices no later than 3 business days before full committee. I thank everyone for being here. This concludes today's business with the markup of this bill. The committee now stands adjourned.